It was supposed to be just another ordinary shift at the hospital. Long hours, the steady hum of beeping monitors, and the endless shuffle of footsteps down the sterile white hallways. But for Emily Carter, a 26-year-old nurse with a heart too big for her own good, that night would change everything. It started with a single act of kindness. One decision that would come back to her in the most unexpected way. Emily had always been the kind of person who put others before herself. She had worked tirelessly to become a nurse, not for the money, but because she truly believed in helping people. She was known around the hospital for going the extra mile, staying late to comfort anxious patients, bringing in small gifts for those who had no visitors, and always wearing a warm smile, even on the hardest days. That evening, as she made her rounds, she met an older man named Mr. Dawson. He had been admitted earlier that week with severe chest pains, and after multiple tests, the doctors confirmed that he needed urgent surgery. Without it, he wouldn't survive. But there was a problem. He didn't have insurance, and his family couldn't afford the procedure. Emily overheard him speaking with the doctor, his voice strained with helplessness. "There's no way I can pay for this," he said softly, his eyes clouded with worry. Something about the way he spoke, the way he clutched his hospital gown, as if trying to hold himself together, struck a chord deep within Emily. She had seen cases like his before, patients who were forced to choose between debt and their own lives. It never got easier, and no matter how many times she witnessed it, she could never quite shake the feeling that the world was unfair to people like Mr. Dawson. That night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't stop thinking about him. His tired, hopeless eyes haunted her. She thought about his family, about what it would mean for them to lose him over something as cruel as money. She tossed and turned, her heart heavy. She didn't have much to spare, but she had enough in her savings to cover the cost of his surgery. It was money she had been setting aside for a new apartment, a better life for herself. But compared to saving someone's life, what did that matter? By morning, her mind was made up. She spoke to the hospital's billing department and arranged for the payment. "Are you sure about this?" the woman behind the desk asked, raising an eyebrow. "It's not a small amount, I'm sure," Emily said firmly. She had never been more certain of anything in her life. The surgery was scheduled for the next day, and it went smoothly. Mr. Dawson survived, and Emily couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of relief as she saw him recovering, color returning to his face. He had no idea that she was the reason he was still alive, and she planned to keep it that way. Days passed, and life at the hospital went on as usual. Emily continued her shifts, smiling through the exhaustion, feeling a quiet satisfaction in knowing she had done the right thing. She never expected anything in return. In fact, she hadn't even told anyone about what she had done. It was enough for her to know that Mr. Dawson had a second chance at life. But then, something strange happened. One evening, as she sat at home sipping a cup of tea, her phone buzzed with a notification. A deposit had been made into her bank account. She almost didn't check it at first, assuming it was just her usual paycheck. But when she finally did, her breath caught in her throat. The number on the screen didn't make sense. It wasn't her salary. It wasn't even close. It was an amount so large that her hands began to shake as she stared at it. Where had it come from? Who had sent it? And why? Her heart pounded as a dozen questions swirled in her mind. She hadn't told anyone about the money she spent on Mr. Dawson's surgery. She hadn't asked for anything in return. So, how was it possible that, just days later, a sum far greater than what she had given had mysteriously appeared in her account? Something was going on, and Emily was about to find out the truth. Emily's fingers hovered over her phone screen, her breath shallow as she stared at the impossible number in her bank account. It didn't feel real. She blinked hard, half expecting the digits to change, to shrink down to what they were supposed to be. But they didn't. The money was there, and it was far, far more than what she had spent on Mr. Dawson's surgery. Her mind raced. This had to be a mistake, a banking error. Maybe someone had transferred funds to the wrong account. That had to be it. But even as she tried to convince herself, doubt crept in. What if it wasn't a mistake? What if someone had deliberately sent her this money? She took a shaky breath and clicked into the transaction details. No sender name, no description, just a massive deposit sitting in her account like a secret waiting to be unraveled. Her hands trembled as she set her phone down. This wasn't normal, and she had no idea what to do next. The next morning, she barely made it through her shift. Every beep of a monitor, every passing conversation felt distant. Her thoughts kept circling back to the money. She needed to find out where it came from, but how? During her lunch break, she decided to check in on Mr. Dawson, not because she thought he had anything to do with this, but because, after everything, she felt connected to him in a way she couldn't explain. He was sitting up in bed, looking stronger than he had in days. His daughter, a woman in her 30s, with kind eyes and a soft voice, sat beside him. They both turned when Emily walked in. "There she is," Mr. Dawson said, smiling warmly. "The angel who's been taking such good care of me." Emily smiled back, pushing aside her swirling thoughts. "How are you feeling today?" "Better than I have in years," he said, stretching his arms a little. "Like I've been given a second chance." His daughter nodded, her eyes shining with gratitude. "We can't thank you enough," she said. "The doctors told us how much you've been checking in on him. It means a lot." Emily felt a pang of guilt. They didn't know the full truth, and she wasn't about to tell them. After a few more minutes of conversation, she excused herself. But as she turned to leave, Mr. Dawson spoke again. "You know," he said, his voice thoughtful, "kindness has a way of finding its way back. To us. Sometimes when we least expect it." Emily hesitated for just a second before nodding. "I guess so," she said softly. But as she walked back down the hall, his words stayed with her. That evening, she finally decided to take action. She called her bank, half expecting them to confirm that this was all just a clerical error. But when she reached a representative, the response she got was anything but ordinary. The deposit was made through a private account. The woman on the other end explained. "There's no listed sender." Emily's heart pounded. "So you're saying someone intentionally sent me this money, but didn't leave a name?" "That's correct." She swallowed hard. "Is there any way to trace it?" "I'm afraid not," the representative said. "It was processed anonymously." A chill ran down Emily's spine. This wasn't a mistake. Someone had done this on purpose. But who? And why? Over the next few days, the mystery only deepened. She barely told anyone what was happening, partly because she wasn't sure who she could trust, and partly because she didn't know what to make of it herself. She considered returning the money, but with no sender information, how could she? And what if rejecting it somehow made things worse? She was caught in a strange limbo, unsure whether she had stumbled into an unexpected blessing, or something far more complicated. Then, just when she thought things couldn't get any stranger, she received an email. No sender name, no subject line, just a short, cryptic message. "Your kindness didn't go unnoticed. More is coming." Emily's pulse quickened. More is coming. What did that mean? She stared at the screen, a sinking feeling settling in her chest. This wasn't just about money anymore. Someone was watching. Someone knew what she had done, and whoever they weren't finished yet. Emily's hands trembled. As she reread the email, the words sent a chill through her. More is coming. What did that even mean? And who was behind it? Her mind raced through the possibilities. Could it be Mr. Dawson, his daughter, someone at the hospital who had found out what she had done? But how would they even know? She had told no one. And if it was them, why stay anonymous? The more she thought about it, the less sense it made. That night, sleep refused to come. She kept checking her bank account, half expecting another mysterious deposit to appear. But there was nothing. Just silence. The email, the money, everything hung over her like a weight she couldn't shake. The next morning, as she dragged herself to work, she felt a strange unease. It wasn't fear exactly, but something was off, like an invisible presence lingering just behind her, watching. She moved through her shift distracted, forcing smiles and trying to push the growing anxiety to the back of her mind. It wasn't until her lunch break that everything changed. A hospital administrator approached her near the nurse's station. "Emily, there's someone in the lobby asking for you," he said. Looking curious, she frowned. Who? They wouldn't say. Her stomach twisted into a knot. Was this it? Was she about to finally get answers? With cautious steps, she made her way to the front lobby. At first, she didn't see anyone who looked out of place. Just the usual crowd, family members waiting, patients checking in. Then her eyes landed on an older man standing near the entrance. He was dressed in an expensive suit, his silver hair neatly combed back. There was something about him. His presence was commanding, yet reserved, like someone used to being in control. When their eyes met, he gave a small nod. "Emily Carter?" he asked, his voice steady. She hesitated before nodding. "Yes." He took a step closer, studying her as if confirming something for himself. Then, after a long pause, he said, "You paid for my brother's surgery." Emily's breath caught. "Your brother, Walter Dawson," the man said. "I'm James Dawson." Her mind reeled. Mr. Dawson had never mentioned a brother. James sighed, as if sensing her confusion. "I live overseas. Walter and we lost touch years ago. It wasn't until recently that I found out he was in the hospital. By the time I tried to step in, it was already done. You had already saved him." Emily didn't know what to say. "I spoke to Walter," James continued. "He doesn't know you paid for the surgery, but I do. I had my people look into it." That sent a shiver down her spine. His people. Just who was this man? "I don't expect anything in return," she said quickly, her voice steady, despite the nervous pounding in her chest. "I didn't do it for that." "I know," James said simply. "That's why I did what I did." Emily's breath hitched. "The money?" He nodded. "It was me." Her knees nearly gave out. After days of uncertainty, she finally had an answer. But before she could say anything, he continued. "I didn't do it as repayment. I did it because I was wrong about a lot of things in my life," he said, his voice quiet. "For years I focused on business, on wealth, on things that didn't really matter. I forgot what it meant to care about people. And then I found out that a stranger had done more for my brother than I ever did." Emily's throat tightened. "I wanted to set things right," James said. "And I wanted to make sure you never had to hesitate if you ever wanted to help someone again." She shook her head. "But this is too much. I don't know if I can accept it." He gave her a small knowing smile. "You already have." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then James reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "If you ever need anything, call me," he said, handing it to her. "And Emily," she looked up, "keep being the kind of person who doesn't think twice about doing the right thing," he said. "The world needs more people like you." With that, he turned and walked away. disappearing into the crowd outside. Emily stood there for a long time, the card still clutched in her hand, the weight of everything settling in. She had started this journey with nothing but a gut feeling that someone needed help. She had never expected anything in return, but somehow, in the end, kindness had found its way back to her in ways she never could have imagined. As she walked back toward the hospital, she felt lighter, as if something had shifted within her. Maybe it wasn't about the money. Maybe it never had been. Maybe it was about knowing that, even in a world that sometimes felt cold and unfair, one act of kindness could still change everything.